right, well, good afternoon, everybody. Yes, we were back there partying. Sorry, you caught us partying, and now we have to come out here and talk. So, first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming. I've had the pleasure of just talking to Kimberly in the back for a little while, and she's got such, amazing accomplishments, but is also just a wonderful and amusing human being. So I think we're going to have a very good time. And I'm going to ask her some questions, really make it a very open conversation. But I promise to save room so that you can ask her some questions too, because it will be worth it. She's got some amazing insights. So just wanted to jump into it. Now, I have to ask you the first and most obvious question that pops up for me. Can you please tell me how you came upon the handle Museum Mammy? Because that is really provocative, and it would be foolish of me not to ask.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you guys so much for being here on such a dreary day.
And rainy, right?
It's raining, but I'm so excited to be here. It's my second trip to Chicago, and it's a city that I, for a very long time, was afraid to visit because I knew I wouldn't want to leave. Yeah. And I'm back again and risking it all. But at any rate, so Museum Mammy was a handle that I started when I was an undergraduate at Smith College. And I originally had been really fascinated with, actually, I think Gwendolyn Brooks is from Chicago, but I was fascinated with Gwendolyn Brooks's novel, Maud Martha, which is a book very much about Black female interiority and trying to, it's a book that has very little dialogue, and it's very much about the things that she's thinking through in the world around her. So my original handle was actually Maud Mammy, and I'd always been fascinated with the Mammy figure as one that was just a complicated figure through which we understood Black femininity in a domestic space, but then also the spaces in which women work. And so I kind of fused those two things together, so this interior work kind of attitude and understanding of a Black female subjectivity. And then I became obsessed with digital technologies in museums, started to follow this account called Museum Nerd. Museum Nerd ended up being my mentor, and then Museum Mammy kind of came to be. And so for me, I think about Museum Mammy as a handle and more of an opportunity to be able to bring my own experiences into the museum space as a cultural practitioner. It's not necessarily to say that I'm the caretaker, because goodness knows I'm just trying to keep it together myself. But I do like it as a very subversive way to think about what a woman's work looks like.
Interesting. Can you explain a little bit about your mission at the Met? I mean, obviously we know what your role is, and you're doing an incredible job at it, very high profile, which I think is in a great way, and kind of bringing art, pop culture more closely together, or fine arts and pop culture more closely together. What would you say is your mission when you're coming into the office, when you're out and about? What is it that you are trying to achieve through this role that you have?
Yeah, for me, and especially too because the Met Gala is on Monday, for me, in my role at the museum, what I'm most interested in doing, and which is kind of an echo of our mission statement as it stands right now, is bringing art to life. What I want to do is present the possibility of a museum experience for as wide of an audience as possible. So whether that be sharing particular works that I know are kind of fan favorites, so I know the Temple of Dender is going to do really well, and it's also celebrating its 50th anniversary. I also know that people love Impressionism generally. So I try to find those images that perhaps can have a dialogue with some particular instance in someone's life. I think about those encounters as opportunities to run into an old friend or something like that. But then that's just the lure. And so once people arrive there, I want to be able to provide content that people feel that they're a part of. One of the great things about encyclopedic institutions like the Art Institute of Chicago as well is that there's so many different cultures represented within these institutions, so many histories held, so many different experts who are treating many different instances in history. And so it's my job really as more of an interpreter to be able to take super scholarly language and bring it into the world of kind of a civilian experience, one that doesn't in any way water down the scholarship, but makes it more approachable, provides people with an opportunity to become more engaged.
How do you, I know with social media, and we face this ourselves in a media organization, people measure through retweets and shares and going viral, but how do you personally measure your success? Are there ways that you know that you're making this impact that you're trying to make? And if you could share maybe an example of something like that?
Yeah, I'd be curious to ask you that too.
Okay, I'll take a turn.
So I'm gonna go and then you go.
Okay, me next.
Because it's such an interesting conversation within this world of digital, and especially too in the time of influencer culture.
Right.
There's a lot of conversation about being able to run your entire followership through this algorithmic engine to figure out who's real and who's fake, right?
Right.
And I think that that's an important way to preface any dialogue about the metrics of social. For me, I've always, and I think it's perhaps because I have more of a background in art history and African American studies, I'm much more interested in the humanities of all of it. So I think about the small battles that are fought on social media. So for example, hearing stories from particular individuals who watched a Facebook Live video that I produced, and they feel like in some way it helped them in their scholarship or the things that they were doing. One of my coworkers, her 8-year-old daughter watched our Facebook Live and then decided that she wanted to be a fashion designer because she saw Olivier Rousting from MOMA on the video with Alina Cho. And I'm just like, those kinds of things, like, one, make me cry like a baby, and two, make me feel like the work is really about it, because, you know, a tweet could get 1,000 retweets or go viral in this way. But I think that there's so much more that can be said for particular impacts. Or when I was at Creative Time 5 years ago, we had a Tom Sachs exhibition and Kanye West came to it. Kanye tweeted about the show. This mother who was raising her son in Brooklyn saw the tweet, brought her son to the show, tweeted about the show too. And so we were able to build this narrative that is saying, okay, this celebrity saw this show, this celebrity has this particular reach. Within this reach, this actual real person came to the show with her child and, you know, created this bit of media advertising exhibition, trying to figure out ways that are non-hierarchical storytelling through the kind of gaze of metrics is really something that I'm intrigued by. But I wonder too, for you, as you are working with a brand that's so legendary and so iconic, bringing it into the digital world, how you guys are able to, one, maintain integrity, and two, like, what the kind of importance is as you guys are thinking about your digital technologies.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one thing that's important is that, you know, the message remains the same, the approach remains the same, the platforms may change. So for Ebony and also for Jet, you know, the sister publication, the way that people used to know they had impact was, you know, the pass along rate. You know, people are passing along the magazine, you're seeing it in the barbershop, you're seeing it in the beauty salons. Now you have to measure in a different way. You might be measuring retweets or measuring the analytics and seeing how many times a post is shared. But I also agree with you that there's also this personal impact. So we have a story on ebony.com that does exceedingly well at all times, and I think it's kind of a commentary on our current times, and it's Black Wall Street, and it talks about the destruction of Black Wall Street. It's very historical, but it's also very literary, like a beautifully told story. It really hammers home like the anguish, the pain, and it also shows you, you know, we deal with this kind of, and I won't specify, but political rhetoric that asks, why don't black people have more of this? And here the article answers that. Well, when we did have more of this, this is what you did. Right. So, you know, you came in, you destroyed this city, you destroyed this place in history. And the way I measured my success was one day my mother, who is 70 and is extremely intelligent, a former school teacher, but does not really like the interwebs very much, told me that she read an intriguing story about Black Wall Street. And I was like, Mom, that's Ebony, that's where I work. So, you know, I gave up at that point on, you know how your mom is. Your mom's like, she does something, I don't know, magazines. But at any rate, the fact that it resonated so deeply that she even read it and she's barely online, that showed me, you know, the depth that you can reach. And it also is important to me to see that that story, though it was written maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, continues to be one of the top. And it demonstrates that we're able to get that history out and get that information out, and through a prism that is relevant today. So I agree with you that I think you don't want to get so stuck in these algorithms and it went viral. It's like, who did it touch? Can someone tell you that something touched them, changed their life, something to that effect? So I definitely see your point there. Yeah,
I kind of describe it as a very jazz-like strategy, where it's like you could get really like precise and classical about these ways of doing it, and people oftentimes, if I'm at a dinner party and it gets really boring, people turn to me and they're like, so you work in social media, like what's the best time to post?
8 o'clock in the morning, right? You're like, what are you talking about?
It's like we reach people all over the world.
Right, and it depends on what it is.
Right, it's just not wed that particular way, but if you can make something that people feel that they're a part of, you never know. I mean, people in our constituency online surprise me every single day by the things that they like. Some random, you know, Ottoman rug or something will just like blow someone's world away, and they're like all exclamation points in the comment section and sharing. And I'm just like, it was not like if you see
this is what gets you
right. You never know. So yeah, I love that story about your mom.
Yeah, that was hysterical.
That's
it taught me a lot.
My mom would do some stuff like that.
Right. Do you think that and we face this too in terms of articles. There's so much information out there. There's a content overload. There's probably also an artistic overload. The good thing is there are so many talented people out there. The bad news is that sometimes it seems like we live in a timeline society where things get pushed until they're gone. Do you feel that art is more lasting or less so because of the digital culture and the way that things just kind of phase in and out?
Yeah, I think for me, perhaps my biggest hope is that people, in this moment of images proliferating our lives in ways that, in new ways, in more dynamic ways, that people feel more a part of the creative process. I am really fortunate because I grew up in Orange, New Jersey, which is super close to Newark, New Jersey, where the Black Arts Movement was really housed. And then growing up so close to New York and having gone to the Metropolitan Museum as a child, I was always around art and creativity. I never felt like I couldn't be an artist. And I realized that many of my peers don't have that privilege. And so for me, I want people to feel like, yo, I could do that. You know, like there's that joke about modern art where people are like, a kid could do that. Like, I don't think that that's the worst thing in the world. Like, I think that if you understand that images exist within time for particular reasons, and there is an art historical relationship to every image that's created, bomb. Right. But even a step further is that you feel like your craft or the thing that you want to bring into the world can have value. There's nothing like that, you know. I think especially too when you're thinking about what it means to be Black right now. I want particularly Black people to feel empowered to tell their stories in whatever way makes most sense for the means that they're trying to communicate through. And so I hope that in this moment where people are seeing more art, that they just see that they can participate and that it doesn't have to be particularly like this particular choreography for participation.
Well, that's a really good point, because I think you see that with all these other venues. Like, people see that you can be a dancer. They see there's more accessibility to that. And I guess you're right. You can see that that is as viable a career option for me as being an accountant or being anything else that I have immediate exposure to. And you're right that in certain communities, unfortunately, that is almost a luxury if you think about it. And art is, you know, in this social space allows you to see the possibilities. But of course, there's always a flip side, and something that I'd like to talk to you about. And I just want to make sure, does everyone in the audience is familiar with the situation about the Michelle Obama mural? Or can I see like a show of hands of people who are aware? I'm sure everybody here. We got a smart audience. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, what is the line between appreciating and appropriating. So we have this artist who, or as he explained that he was in this particular situation, he saw himself as an urban planner and a placemaker. So someone who takes something and remixes it and uses it. He put the mural up. The young lady was an Ethiopian-born artist who actually created it, was like, what is this? Finds out about it through social media, which is, again, the great equalizer. And, they're going back and forth. And it's kind of an ugly battle to see, because he's saying, hey, I'm helping. I'm creating visibility. This is I never said I created it per se, but I'm sharing it. Now look at all the exposure you have. Meanwhile, she's saying, you didn't license this from me. You didn't ask my permission. I didn't know what this was for. This is wrong. So you being a curator and being so attuned to this world, how do you see this scenario from a general perspective? Obviously, we don't know them. We don't want to malign either of them, but what do you think about this scenario and the fact that this can happen anytime, and it does happen often?
Yeah, I mean, it's we're in such a wild time with the way that images are being shared. And I think it's something that happens both visually and then also just thinking about writing as well, right?
True,
where someone's like, can you write 800 words for exposure? And you're like, no.
Right.
Like, no. I could write 800 words for my
pay, right?
Right, for myself.
Right.
But for me, I think it's just tragic. There's no real way to call it anything else. Because I think anybody as a cultural practitioner, when you're making an image, there is a marriage that you have to it. And so thinking about losing it is a difficult thing. A lot of times when I travel and talk to artists, they're very hesitant about putting their work online. And for me, as a person who made a career out of putting other people's images online, I'm always super sensitive to those kinds of conversations, because there's there's a way to do it. Like if ever someone asks me personally, like, I saw my image on Black Contemporary Art, can you take it down? It's down.
Right, no argument
No
whatsoever.
argument. I don't need to know why or whose or how's or whatever. I will do my due diligence to make sure that it's removed, because at the end of the day, you have this particular ownership. But I think for me, if there's something that can be deemed that's positive out of that dialogue, is that I hope that she gets the justice that she deserves, right. And then that people know moving forward when those things do happen that there is a procedure for it. Because it doesn't have to be this, battle of power in the ways that we might think. That there can be some opportunities for her to be able to claim ownership over the image that she created. And I think that is what makes social media so great, is that for a long time, especially when you think about Black narratives, there's been these moments in history where people are like, that didn't happen. Or even when you think about this political climate when, there are still people who are Holocaust deniers, and you're just like, how?
Right, how could you possibly?
How?
There's so many museums, so many artifacts,
but, people live their truths, and I think this is an opportunity more now than ever for us to be able to say, like, this is what I know to be true, and I'm going to fight for my images and for my rights. And I have these tools to do so. And best case scenario, I have this community that's backing me. And I think that was what's so great, because even so, offline, Kyra and I were talking about this story and thinking about how to bring it up onto the stage. And there was a great article on ebony.com about it.
Thank you.
And the young woman whose work it was, not only was she able to give her own statement, which was brilliant and thoughtful, but also she was mentioning how many people had DM'd her the image, how many people had commented on it, or even thinking about, there was an incident, some brand posted someone's image, and then Francesca Lee got into the comment section battle with them. So thinking about people who can come in to fight the fight with you is like everything, because there's a difficulty of the incident, but then knowing that you're not alone in that fight is something that I think is a definite positive of digital sharing of images. And if you, as an artist, are interested in sharing your work online, there are risks to it. I mean, and every selfie, there's a particular risk, but in the same way that there's a particular risk in leaving your apartment and coming to this talk. So you have to think about what the benefits are. And I think from my desk, absolutely, community is one of those benefits.
So I know you have this, you're trying to embrace and you're trying to provide exposure, but even you, as you say, have some people, like, no, I didn't want that exposure. What is, in your mind, the proper way to do this? Because I think we all, in some way, when we're using social media or we're online, we're curators of sorts, even in a very practical or on a very low level. What is the best way to give someone credit, do you think, for something that they've done in this context of, I want to share this beautiful painting I see on my Instagram? What would you say would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to intentionality. For me, as a person who, like I said earlier, made my career putting other images online, and I continue to do so, I think about it as an opportunity to educate others on what someone has done, to educate others on my taste, to be able to wayfind for folks who are interested in perhaps finding something that I've found. And so I think about it also as this hunger. So if I find an image, perhaps online, that maybe I don't know where it came from, I try to Google image search and think very critically about the spaces in which it may have come from before I publish anything. So for me, I really make a point of not posting things that I can't properly credit or tribute.
So
and I
think sourcing is
the sourcing is everything. Yeah. Like, it's really
it's like your term paper.
That deep.
You would never just take a term paper, write it up, and you don't have your citations, you don't have where you got this originally. And I think we kind of get lost in that in our haste. I think haste is part of this too. Yeah. It's I want to get this up before other people get it up. I want to be the person that found this, but you don't think about where it came from and the impact that it might have.
Right. I think every post of something that is not of your own hand is an opportunity to celebrate what someone else has done. And I think if you're going to throw a party, you want to make sure that you have all of the things in line before the guests arrive.
And I love that.
And so that's kind of it, where you want to be able to say, even if it's something, and there's difficulty, of course, too, and I come in contact with it all the time at the Metropolitan Museum, where there's periods of collection in art history that we just don't know the names of the creators. But with all that you have, with every bit of information or provenance that you can gather about an object, throw it up there so that people can continue to do the research too. Because I think also, when you don't source things properly, you deny people the opportunity to do the research. And so you're doubly making a mistake. And so being able to take that slower time and understand that these images can have a real impact on people, the practitioners, the audience, yourself, should you run into an issue with rights or Getty Images comes for you. There's just so much more of an ecosystem around all of these things that we cherish, and it needs to be respected.
What do you think about the notion of having so much digital output making people lazier? So if someone decided for whatever reason, because this would be crazy, not to come to this beautiful institution because they feel like they can see these things online or they can experience them, you know, through a screen. Do you think that that is realistic? Is that something that institutions should be mindful of? Are there steps that they should take in order to make that tactile experience more important so that people know that there's something to that? You know, we face the same challenge with a magazine and paper format versus digital format. You don't want one cannibalizing the other. Mm-hmm. How do you interact with that dynamic?
Yeah, I think that digital technology, I mean, the line is really getting super fuzzy in the most amazing way. I think in the coming years, we're going to see so many more exhibitions that are digitally integrated. I think by way of some institutions like the Tate is doing amazing work, fusing technology or new technologies with kind of older ways of viewing artworks. For example, at the Met Cloisters right now, we have an exhibition where there's these really old, very delicate boxwood carvings, and then there's a VR experience paired with it, and you're like, what?
So it's like a multi-dimensional.
Right, so
okay.
it's just different entryways into viewing artwork. And so I think from my desk, that's kind of how I view digital technology as well. It's just a different way of seeing. I like to think of my job as an opportunity to make more doors into the museum. And so for me, it's really a door. It's really an opportunity to say, this is some insight into what we have going on. Hopefully it is intriguing enough for you that you want to come in. I think if there's a mistake that people in the museum world make quite often is that we assume that people care, and they simply don't always. And so it's our job to make sure that when they do finally, strike up the interest, that we're there with open arms to welcome them into our institutions. But in the meantime, digital is an opportunity on the front lines to meet people where they're at. You know, we are going onto Twitter and publishing these messages. We're going onto Instagram and publishing these messages to try to meet you guys. We want to meet you guys where you're at. And that's something that I was trying to do early on with Black Contemporary Art. I wanted for communities of people to have access to these images in their pockets, so that it feels like a very regular encounter to be able to see new images every day. But at the same time, I think that there is nothing like seeing an artwork in person. But I think it gets into a weird kind of hierarchy and this like old school versus new school thing that I'm like very disinterested in. Like, if you want to look at it in your pocket, go for it. If you want to look at it in a gallery, go for it. Do the institutions need you to survive? Do we need your physical presence to survive? Absolutely. And so that's the other part that happens, within that ecosystem too. The programs can't go on without people coming and sitting their butts in the seats. That participation is vital. But at the same time, I would be a fool to say that there's one best way of viewing something or one best way of encountering an experience.
Understandable. So, and you see, it sounds like in the future there are already some initiatives going on in this direction. You might go into a museum, you might be immersed in some sort of experience that's related to an exhibit, and then there are tactile aspects to it, there's virtual reality aspects to it, there may be audio, so almost like everything could be a multimedia kind of experience. So that sounds interesting. Do you see that coming soon, or is that something maybe further out in the future?
We're here. It's definitely happening, and I think for some organizations with more resources, you're seeing it more readily,
okay.
Right? And I think from an accessibility standpoint, we all really benefit, because you think about a tactile art experience. If you have visitors who are coming into the museum who are blind or partially blind, then they can actually have an experience in the galleries, and that's amazing, right? The Baltimore Museum of Art does an excellent job of thinking about tactile exhibitions as well. So it's happening now. It just depends on which kind of institutions at which scale they're working that you're seeing these things. I think history and science museums are perhaps at the forefront of thinking through digital technology in the galleries. But there's a lot of new ways of viewing, and I think it's really exciting, and hopefully in the same turn we'll listen better to constituents who come into the museum and say like, maybe not this, maybe that,
Right.
and there can be an evolution.
Okay. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, because we deal with this a lot on Ebony in terms of just different things, like for example, the fact that, I didn't know this, but Kim Kardashian invented the cornrow, you know, such things as that, you know. Kylie Jenner is the first person to have plump lips. You know, who knew? You know, here I am like, well, let me see here, what's happening? I seem to have plump lips right now. But I think in the art world, there's a similar, like what we've been able to do is we show receipts, and that's what we call it, where we can go back into history, we can go back into different magazines, we can go back into pop culture from the 70s and 60s and dispel some of the myths that come about from maybe laziness or lack of introspection that we have in our culture. Do you see in the art world this people of color, Black people being able to use digital to kind of show receipts for things that they've done in the artistic vein? Is that something that you think is a power that we have, or are we still kind of disenfranchised in terms of knowing different input that people of color have had in the art world in different mediums?
Yeah, I think right now, not right now, the last few decades really, scholarship in art history being acted out by Black scholars has very much been dispelling the myth of the first. Because a lot of times I think people will tent-pole someone as the first or the only, and then it does a disservice to their peers at that particular time. And so for me, I'm always intrigued, especially by the social history of any artwork, to be able to say, this is what was going on politically, this is perhaps what they would have bumped into, this is the graduating class that they went from this school from, or this was the downtown scene at the time, this is the person who may have been at that opening, this person made these things, they're not just, you know, a civilian bystander in this kind of art historic moment. So I think as people are writing in those histories, it's really important to be able to give a full context and not just look at the actual artifacts that are produced, but thinking about a more fuller story around everything that's created that we're understanding. The battle for, I think it's different, of course, within our historical discourse, but if you look at something like the history of modernism, of course, you think about how you know, African masks arrive in paintings, or these kind of particular ways of viewing a face, or these structures, or the way that these abstractions are constructed are very much sourced from elsewhere and not properly credited. Or thinking about photographers specifically have a really crazy history of this, of just like popping up, being super voyeuristic and dipping out as if they're not, you know, imaging humans. But I think that the receipt building is something that's far more, not far more luscious, but definitely a luscious kind of exercise as you uncover and really do the service to the work in ways that unfortunately haven't had the opportunity to happen yet. I really would be remiss not to bring up a scholar like Deb Willis, who has dedicated her life to unpacking images of Black beauty and images by Black practitioners. But going through those histories and really sitting with it, or right now in New York, there's an exhibition called We Wanted a Revolution about Black women artists from I think 1965 to 1985. Those exhibitions and that kind of work is the receipts of our world, and being able to say, this story needs to be told in this particular way as something that is important and divine to understanding a historical moment, and these stories will not go quiet any longer.
Wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I think the receipts are important, and the spreading of the receipts is even more important. Do you see, like, we've always had these people that have this scholarly notion, but is it spreading, you think, widely enough is the question? Because sometimes I'm still surprised in 2017, some of the firsts that we get across, you know, any kind of scholarship, that's film, that's literature, anything. Do you see that spreading widely enough for your taste based on your own knowledge?
Yeah.
You do?
I mean, I think for me, I love the opportunity to be someone who can like straddle academia and pop culture world, because it's so easy to do, and I think it's really an understanding on both. Not easy, like I'm tired, but let me tell you, I'm working very hard. But aside from that, being able to privilege both communities equally is something that I feel a great privilege to be able to do, and that people follow me with it. Because it's an important thing. I think last weekend, my humble brag is that I was in conversation with Solange.
Right, and she did a great job, y'all. You got to look this up.
But she was really excellent in talking about some of her inspirations in the world of art specifically, or within the world of culture, and just being able to understand that we are all kind of these, we're all constantly receiving images from all different kinds of modes of thinking. We all have access to different levels of text. And so I think that proliferation is happening really rapidly now, or thinking about, someone like Solange, or someone like Amanda Stallenberg, or someone like Rowan Blanchard, or Yara Shahidi, these young people who are taking a really political stance on information.
Right.
And pairing it with these really robust images that people want to participate in, or thinking about the work of Teen Vogue in this moment, where there is an intensely intelligent, and ebony for all time. I mean,
thank
shit.
You. Okay, I was gonna say, I'm getting a little
right,
jealous over here. I was like,
but these publications that have the ability to, like I said, meet people where they're at,
right.
and take these really difficult to understand histories. The writers take that to task, break it down, and provide it to a general public. That's everything, and it's something that is a really, it's life's work,
Yeah.
taking really complicated histories and making it something that everybody from the babies to the grandmas can really understand it and feel a part of, and want to retell the story. And any opportunity I think that we have as culture workers to take something and turn it into oral history, to turn it into something that there's that handoff as you described, is a real success. And there's not a numeric value or a dollar amount that you can really put on it. It's totally qualitative.
And I mean, I like your point about Solange, because she does such a wonderful job also of just infusing her music, her videos, her visuals with this rich tapestry of artistry. And you can see her appreciation for it in the things that she does. And her lesser known sister Beyonce, got a lot of attention, little Beyonce, got a lot of attention to even Daughters of the Dust through
right.
her Lemonade visual album.
So, people talk about Julie Dash like every day
right,
now.
And that's
they should have been this whole time.
This whole time, you are right. That's exactly
yeah.
right. But it's even if it's late, it's still not too late.
Right.
But it just seems like more artists are artists, even if they're not in the art or the fine arts world, are taking it upon themselves to say, hey, I have this platform and I need to disseminate information that goes beyond me and beyond my ego and beyond fame. I want to infuse this with things that people can then take and make that leap. Like you said, Daughters of the Dust, I believe, is re-released. And I've got to believe that has something to do with, the demand from the Lemonade visuals. But who would you say, I know you find Solange very inspiring. I know she found you inspiring as well. You've interviewed Alicia Keys. Who would you say are some of the artists that are out there, and it could be across any kind of platform, that are really pushing the envelope? You mentioned Yara, you mentioned Amanda. Are there other musicians or other people in that space that you think are kind of pushing the envelope in that direction and really bringing forth these artistic images and kind of merging art and pop culture?
Well, of course, Kanye.
Yes.
Another gem.
Right.
Kyra's a gem.
He's a gem. And he's
Gemini,
from Chicago-ish, kind of, yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah, so topical.
Yes,
oh my God, I didn't even do that on purpose.
She did that on purpose to make you guys cheer.
But I also really love someone like Carrie Mae Weems, who is an artist who has a very activist history, and then also has an incredible legacy as an educator. Dawood was just here at noon, who's someone who is incredibly important to our scholarship. Trying to think who else would be really great to know. Martine Sims is an artist who's working out of Los Angeles. And for previously Chicago, I keep doing it. I'm so good at this.
She's doing it on purpose.
No, I'm just kidding. But I think that Martine is an artist who personally I want to bring up, because she, during the week, I think it's unfortunate because I can't parse out which week which person was killed, unjustly.
I know.
But there was an incident where, and for me, I sit on the internet all day. That's what I do professionally. And after a while, it starts to weigh on you psychologically. And I've been really struggling in the past year to sit in the internet and be able to contest with these ideas and know, and to try to really maintain an optimistic output. But I think Martine is an artist who, on one of those days, was doing a program at this place in New York called Light Industries, and she showed these videos by Black women that were just like I'd never seen before. And it was just this opportunity to see that the moving image could be a place of positivity and reality, right? Not every image has to be a smiling face, but not every image has to be violence or misery, or earlier Cecil was talking about showing images that aren't just based in Black misery. So those artists are ones that I really love. I love any artist that shouts out other artists, because I'm just a person who, like, I try to share as much information as possible every day. And I think that is what makes the culture rich. It's like this gumbo that we're all throwing in ingredients to.
Love that. Well, I've been a big question hog up here, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to leave you guys with that impression.
Wait,
so.
who's inspiring to you before we switch
Oh, look, now she wants to
Who's killing it for you? Who's killing it for you?
Well, I'll say I'm going to go with like the pop culture angle. And I am a little embarrassed with this. I was on the plane listening to Kendrick Lamar's Damn, and I actually teared up at one point listening to it, because it's so powerful, and to use rap in that way to communicate messages about the spiritual, about the political, about condition that is not your own. I think that you could do whatever you want with the talent like that, and the fact that he chooses to use it in this really distinct way. And then what I'm speaking about specifically is he was talking about how America's good to you if you're a certain type of person. And I think that's what got to me. As you say, I work in this industry, I can't help but see all this bleakness and sadness and Black misery and death. And hearing him kind of crystallize that was very powerful for me from an audio perspective. So, I believe in art everywhere. And for me at that moment, that was like a really, really powerful piece of art. And, people on the plane thought I was off, but, it's okay. I knew what I was upset about, so It's fine. Well, I need to open it up to the audience to get some questions for the amazing Kimberly Drew, and she is just that.
So we have 2 microphones. There's Grace up there, and I'm down here. And here's the first question right here.
Hi, Kim. I'm wondering how you negotiate the political within the institution.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
The political with the institution. Well, it is an interesting challenge, right? Because as you know, as a Met alum, there are particular difficulties when you try to politicize an institution, because there's so many things that an institution signifies, right? And so being able to corral all of those signifiers and make a statement about a particular time is something that I think is a unique challenge every day for us. But for me, I find it thrilling to be able to use the voice of the institution to share as many stories as possible through the collection, right? One of the things that makes the Met unlike, the Louvre or something, like we don't have a Mona Lisa. There's not one particular artwork that's kind of like the mascot of the institution. And so being able to take everything from like some random terracotta vase to this painting to this ritual object and put them on the same pedestal, I think is revolutionary. But of course, when you think about this political climate, there's always difficulties, because some days you just want to scream and use this like huge beacon to say something. But like I said, there's different ways. There's quiet work that can be done in the meantime to really be able to leverage that power and to be able to craft new narratives about a particularly old institution and let people know that there's more than meets the eye with what you may encounter within the galleries.
Same side.
And also, we miss you.
Hi. I had a quick question about how you engage with millennials with getting them from seeing this on social media to where they say they're going, but actually getting them there and getting them interested in this. What are kind of for lack of a better word, tactics you use when cultivating those posts?
Yeah. For me, one of the things that I'm most focused on in the work that I'm doing is making something that wants to inspire that in people. I think that there are many reasons in which people don't go into museum spaces, whether those be physical or economic, or there's just so many difficulties, and even thinking about what it means to pass through the threshold of an institution. But for me, I want for people to, especially through my work on Black contemporary art, I liked the idea that if people knew the name of 5 artists, that they may feel more inspired to enter into museum space. because I think a lot of times people may feel like, okay, well, I don't know all of it. And the thing is, you don't have to. That's why the institution exists. You come there to learn at the end of the day, right? So for me, I want to be able to provide people with a vocabulary before they make their entry. Whether they come or not is up to them and up to circumstance. But when they do arrive, I want people to feel empowered once they're there.
We have a question on your left.
I had a question about like with activism and curating an online space. How do you promote a message of activism than like selling like the idea of activism? Because I know with like other like upcoming publications, when they usually like talk about activism, they sometimes like sell you an image without actually like showing steps of how to like better your community. So my question is, how do you like differentiate the two?
Yeah, I think that's a great question for you, Kyra.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting question because there's one thing to report about activism and another to advocate for it. And I think that a lot of publications struggle with that. Ebony, I'm really proud to say, for the first time in my career, I've worked for many mainstream publications. I feel like we are comfortable telling you what you can do. I was telling Kimberly in the back that we have an actual series called In Our Cities where we put the focus on cities that people malign on an average basis, like Chicago, so terrible, all the crime, and Detroit is burnt out and all of this. And we actually go into these cities, show you these positive examples of things that are being done, but also give you the racial backdrop of the city and let you know how it got that way, and try to connect people with activists and others that are in the community trying to better it, you know, whether they get media attention or not. So I think that if I were at another publication, I would probably have some sort of an issue where I'd have to figure out how to toe the line. But with Ebony, because we are about bettering the Black experience and bettering the Black community, I feel like we can do that, and we do try to do that. So there are a lot of articles about what you can do, what steps you can take. Here's a fundraiser that's going on. Here's this or here's that. Whereas I think some other people feel that what they need to do is just report on it with kind of a disinterested, dispassionate, you know, we're standing back behind the curtain. Like, we will say, why is this person dead? What did he do to this police officer? We're not afraid to ask that question. So I think I'm in a bit of a unique experience, but I think you will see that more people are asking their outlets to do that and not to take the official police or state stance on things. They want to know what really happened and what we can do to avoid this, you know, in the future. But that's a really good question, and had it been maybe 6-7 years ago, I might not have been able to answer it like that, but I'm really happy that I can say that today.
We have another question over here.
Yes, we talked about the digital world, but in many respects in the early 20th century, could you say that the invention of radio was equally radical in terms of conveying information and changing people's attitude, exposure to music, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all of those modernities in the way that technologies have evolved over time have given us new opportunities to learn things, right? I'm particularly fascinated in the way of your question about the podcast culture of right now, from about like the early 2010s to this moment, and thinking about how they are opportunities for us to be in constant contact with culture and these very rigorous dialogues in new ways. Because in the same way that not everybody's going to pick up the paper and read it page to page, or not everybody's going to read a full novel, there's just these many opportunities to encounter things, right? And as the podcast boom, I guess, as you could describe it, is happening, there are many more voices and vantage points. And so I think it does serve the cultural dialogue. I want to have as many people's opinions on something as possible in the world. I don't want to hear all of them per se, but I do think that scale is really quite important for us as we are viewing the world. And I think it does a service, especially to marginalized communities, to have these particular outlets, because it's not just one version of the story. You know, it's not just the New York Times saying this thing about this show. It's this, you know, really small magazine that's based out of this neighborhood, or, you know.
Or somebody's bedroom. You know,
Exactly.
Yeah, I think one of the important things, you know, I love that you brought up podcasts, is the cost of ownership before. You couldn't start a radio station. You don't have the resources to start a magazine or have a TV show, but you can certainly jump on Facebook Live. You can be on Instagram. There's a democratization of voice, and I think that that's a key. You know, the radio opened that up, and now there's almost a two-way exchange. So yeah, the mainstream has a voice, but the people have a voice, and they have almost an equally effective way of having that exchange back with the main entities.
Right here in the middle.
That's my question kind of segues from that. Do you have any suggestions or tips for us as individuals on how best to curate our own art in the digital world when we're posting and all?
One thing I always say, and this is going to sound like a cop-out, but it's totally not, is it's really up to you. I think for me, when I was starting my blog, I did not anticipate that it would be successful. If you had talked to me in 2010 and told me that I would be on this stage, I would call you a liar and be like, why are you talking to me? But for me, what made one of the great successes of my blog and one of the great successes of my career is that I truly love it, right? And so I remained committed to doing that research, to doing the slow work of figuring out where these images came from and why they were created and who created them and who they knew and all these things, because I was deeply fascinated by the images. And so as you are a practitioner and engaging on these platforms, you find the one that works for you. You don't have to be on all 10 social media networks, but if you know that Instagram works well for you in your daily flow of life because you're picking up the kids or you're gardening or whatever, so have you, you find the medium that works best for the way that you want to tell your story. And you tell it as much as you can with the frequency that makes sense for you. Because if you don't love to do it, you're not going to do it. And that's the true failure. It's not that you posted at 2 p.m. when you should be posting at 4. Like, no.
Right. It's the passion.
Yeah.
Next question up here.
Hi. So I guess my question is about the internet, social media, and alienation. And I guess you touched on this at the end about like working behind the internet. You said you can use social media as a platform to educate others about your tastes. But I feel like in my experience, I think that's positive, I think it's brilliant. But also I feel like it can be alienating because I feel like there's so much work and effort that goes into like ensuring that we project a certain image onto the world and it doesn't really seem genuine. And I just feel like it's hard for me to engage with that because I just feel like it's not, I don't know, I find it taxing to like, I curate like the perfect image to like display to the world. I'm just like wondering if you could like elaborate about like being alienated by like social media and like constructing an image that like people put on about constructing an image that like you want the world to see.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay, sorry.
Is it about images that are like too choreographed, or?
I guess it's more so about like platforms, I guess like Instagram and how like people like put a lot of energy and like work and like money into like crafting, constructing a persona. And I feel like that's like, I don't know, I find it.
Are you saying it's like a turnoff to have that like kind of just choreographed, really kind of constructed image? I think you could look at the Fire, what was that foolishness? The Fire Festival?
The Fire Festival.
What happened there? Where they were like, oh my God, you're going to be swimming with the swimming pigs and sitting on turtle backs, and then people ended up in like refugee tents, and because Bella Hadid told them to go. I get what he's saying in terms of, I think, personally, from a media perspective, I think we're going to maybe get away from that really carefully constructed, perfect image, cup of coffee with just the right amount of foam, because I think we've reached kind of the tipping point. Like, we all know that it's foolishness. You have to, all right? So, and at this point, people are just being totally exposed. We have some of these influencers who accidentally put all the information, post this at 2 p.m., please. And then people are like, wow, you really don't use that product. You're advertising and you're being very, very naked about it. So I think that personally from a media perspective, I can't speak to the artistic perspective, I think we're reaching a point where people are tired of that, are gonna be looking for more authenticity, and are gonna be projecting more authenticity, because if you are doing Instagrams and they all look like commercials, you might as well just watch commercials, if that makes sense. So I think we've reached a tipping point, I hope, because that Fire Festival was a mess. And anyone who was subscribing to, oh, if it was on Instagram, it's real, I think they woke up this weekend. Sorry, Ja Rule, I didn't mean to embarrass you, but that was a mess. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm curious about that too, because for me, I have, or not so much now, but in the beginning, I had a little bit of anxiety about my Instagram account, because I would look at peers who are like this
Perfectly
very beautiful,
lit, right?
like, kind of pose image, and know that that was not my style. Like, all of my pictures are taken with my phone in my real life.
And they are beautiful, but there is an authenticity to it.
Right.
You know, you're having a good time.
Right. And that's the thing is that like I'm not going to spend 3 hours on an Instagram post because I'm doing something else, quite frankly. And I respect so much people who want to have that as their aesthetic because I believe very much in, you know, the right to an aesthetic. But at the same time, I want to be able to tell a true story about what I do because I know very much that I am, one, not alone as a woman of color in the arts, and I want to be able to show my other friends who are doing this work and have different opinions on things and have different stories, right? But then also to be able to say, like, this is what it can look like, because none of this was guaranteed for me. And that was really what I was thinking about in the beginning of my career too, where I would, so much of the art on my account was because I would go to Chelsea every Saturday or so and go look at exhibitions there. One, because the exhibitions were free and I was broke as hell. And so being able to show people you too can, you know, go and see these shows free of charge in New York City, one of the most expensive cities in the world. So for me, I use it as an opportunity to really like brain to page, flow through the things that I'm seeing in the world as a way of recording all the things I'm seeing in the world as my life continues to accelerate. But if you like it, that's great. If you don't, that's fine. And that's always been kind of my philosophy too. I always think it's funny when people are really obsessed with people who follow or unfollow, and maybe I'm pig-headed about it because I'm like, if you unfollow, like you missing out. I'm about to put you onto some dope stuff.
Right, but if you want to leave, you can go.
Right.
You know, like, it's no problem.
Right, it's open door policy. But I do think too, to the point, like the influencer culture thing is such an interesting thing because there's so much shade about it existing, but then also like people got to make their, like people be writing a book and then also doing these like, you know, cute little posts and getting their coin, like, you know, get your money.
Yeah, but you know what? I could do, like, I've always thought about it. I could do the editor-in-chief with a celebrity selfie, boom. I would rather do the days look in my eye after the shoot is over and there's like litter everywhere, and I'm like, man, it took all day to do this shoot. It was only 1 hour worth of pictures. Look at this, y'all. Because I think, you know, I want people to be in the struggle with me and not be mistaken and look at this job and think that it's a glamorous job, but to know that it's work and work that you can do too. So I love her Instagram. I do highly recommend it. It's very, you know, it's a balance. You know, you've got the cool things that she's doing. She talks about the struggle, talk about everything. And I think social media has made us feel like we need to be perfect. Personally, I find that confining. So that's why I like the fact that, hey, if you want to do it that way and you want to make it look like LL Bean, that's fine. But if you want to be real, I think there should be room for everything.
Yeah, that's the point.
Right, and stay off Fire Island or whatever the heck that is, Fire Fest.
Fire Island good, Fire Festival bad.
Different thing, right.
So
it's the fire with that Y in it, that's the one we want to avoid.
We're going to try 2 more quick ones before we end. We might go a little over, but we're going to do what we can right here.
Hi. First, thank you guys for both being here. And then this is a question that you can both answer. I'm kind of curious about how you maintain the nuance of your Blackness without getting to this place of Black exhaustion. And I'll elaborate a little bit more. So I'm a writer artist, and a lot of times I get called into places to be like, oh, great, we have a Black. Please be the Black that's going to speak about Blackness so we can feel like we've done our part as non-racists to have you here. And so, yes, I want to speak for Black people and Black women and Black artists. I want to have that voice, but at the same time, I also want people to understand that I cry, I poo, I do all these other things as well as much as any other human. I don't just exist as a Black person, I exist as a human person who is also Black. So how do you balance being an amplifying voice for Black women and Blackness and not get to this place of Black exhaustion?
She turned to me. She's like, you know. All right, I'm going in. Okay. So I will say that earlier in my career, when I was, in some sad cases, the Black, you know, and I felt an enormous amount of pressure. What if the Black says the wrong thing and gets everyone in trouble? You know, I actually remember a situation where after Hurricane Katrina, some editors at this publication I was working for asked me, they had never spoken to me before, but they summoned me to a room and they asked me, what do you think about us calling them refugees? And I said, would you do that if it happened in Iowa, or would you do that if it happened in Milwaukee? Well, no. And I was like, well, then I'm gonna let you go with that, because I'm not, I'm not the spokesperson of blackness, and I cannot cover you in sanctified blackness and keep you safe from anger. But I would just challenge you, to use your own mind. And what I usually try to do is I put them in the position so that they understand that they're not talking to an extraterrestrial being. You're talking to a fellow human. So why would you do something to a group of people that you wouldn't want done to the group of people that I guess you most closely identify with? So what I value, I don't mind being the black if that's a situation. What I try to do is get involved in hiring, get involved in mentoring, so that I can make sure that I'm not the only one around. But if I am, I will speak up, but I make it clear, A, that I am not the spokesperson, and I also try to turn it around and find whatever commonality this individual might have or individuals might have, and try to put it on them to figure it out, versus me telling them, I'm about to call Jesse Jackson. I know you didn't just say, I could have done that. I could have done it. I know the Reverend's number, but I was like, no, I'm gonna let you tell me what you think is right here. And they made the right, in my opinion, the right decision. But I think that's what it is. It is wearisome, and it does become a bit of a drag. And I know sometimes I'll have to go, oh my God, not again. When they called me in there, I was like, I've never seen any of these people before. And all of a sudden, I'm the sage. But I think hopefully we're getting to a space where we're less and less of that, because we need to have more representation, and people understand that. Look at the Pepsi commercial, and I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it any better. When it comes down to what could be considered an exhaustion, I try to channel that energy into a younger generation of thinkers, and to making sure that the rooms that I'm in have more people that look and don't look like me. But I don't know. I try not to let that kind of stuff get to me. I don't ever feel like a particular burden about it. I think, and that might be just my dissonance or something, but for me, I'm more than happy to be the black person in the space, and I am always, hypercritical and thoughtful about the invitations that I get, right? And thinking about how, especially as a visible person, I align myself with spaces and brands and media, and say a lot of no's, absolutely, to certain opportunities, and then have the particular guilt where I'm like, well, why did I say no to this check? But then I remember that integrity is the most important thing to me and the most valuable thing. But I also understand that one of my greatest callings is to be a person who can be a representative of a lot of people, and I don't fear that burden at all. Because I know, for me, when I came into this world, I only had one or two examples of other black women in the arts, and for me, I've been really set on being an example for other folks, and that comes with a set of responsibilities. But yeah, so for me, I don't mind to be the black. I'm happy to be the black.
One last question, thank you.
So I'm curious how you weigh the desire for good metrics on social with the responsibility of curation. So I know you mentioned that some, the audience really is interested in impressionism. So I guess, how do you make sure to share an equal, percentage of types of art, or or are you more motivated by showing people what they want to see and what they're going to react to?
Yeah, the variables are really pretty broad. So I try to just think generally per season, per exhibition, make the best guesses on what will do the best, but it's really more about thinking within frameworks. So if I know that I want to dedicate 3 posts this week to Polynesian art, then I want to make sure that I find a work from that particular culture that I think will perform best within the channels. But it's really not like, okay, I'm going to weigh all these things as equal, because that's not how museums are built. Quite honestly, when you think about seasons too, if there's a Syrah exhibition that's high on the chain in terms of visibility and the way that it's placed on the website, of course I'm going to have to share about Syrah, and I wouldn't consider it with a work that perhaps might be in storage. But when I do think about, on a more macro level, all the things that I'm sharing, I try to do it more in buckets, to say, I want to share this particular type of sculpture from this particular region of the world, and maybe I'll use, I'll pair it with this other initiative that we have to share, so think about how the Met Kids platform may think about this particular culture, and share a fun fact as opposed to just sharing an image. But that's kind of more of the thinking. It's not really weighing them all, because there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of things to consider every day, and I have to get these tweets out. So it's about limiting some of the variables in terms of what I have to share first, and then trying to dig through all of those particular parameters or buckets to find the most, appealing image. And some things are duds, and some things need to get shared anyway. Because that happens sometimes too, where I'm like, I'm gonna just push this off, and I know it's not gonna do well, I don't care, next tweet. So that happens sometimes too.
Thank you again, Kim and Kyra, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Yay!